Thank you everybody for joining us. We're going to let everybody get into the webinar and we'll start in just a minute. Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Cohen, and I am the director of JumpSpark. I am so glad that you have joined us this evening as part of our virtual college road trip. JumpSpark drives innovative teen programming out of the Jewish Federation of Greater Atlanta and is one of the 10 communities that comprise the Jewish Teen Education and Engagement Funder Collaborative. We want to thank our friends at Chicago Springboard, Chicago's Jewish Teen Initiative, for inspiring us to create our first ever national road trip, featuring over 30 universities for all college-bound teens and their parents. We also could not have done this without our partners at Forefront Baltimore and the Teen Funder Collective. Our Jump on the Bus virtual college road trip includes student-led tours, professional information sessions, and ways to connect with the colleges you and your teen are interested in. New college tours and information sessions are held daily throughout the month of June. You can follow us on social media at JumpSparkATL or on our website, roadtriptocollege.org, to sign up for more of our sessions and to create your own personal road trip. With that, let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening, Stacy Kay. Stacy is the owner of campus2career.net and is serving as a moderator for many of our virtual college road trip sessions. Professionally, she works to help college students transition to professional life through networking and job search coaching. Just today, we launched her new Brain Spark series as part of the virtual college road trip. The article that went out today is called Summer Plans Canceled, Now What? Get Busy. And throughout the month of June, Stacy will be providing us with exclusive articles and content to help keep teens involved in the college admissions experience, engaged and productive this summer. So thank you again for joining us, and now I'll hand it off to Stacy.
Thank you, Kelly. A couple of things. Wanted to remind you that after this session, you will be redirected to a link that has a survey for you to give us some feedback. We'd love your feedback. And also, you'll get this survey tomorrow in your email, so you have 2 opportunities to fill it out. I also want to encourage you to please put your questions in the Q&A section down below on Zoom. And in chat, you'll notice that Annie Fortnow with JumpSpark has put the website for roadtriptocollege.org. She's also kindly put the link to my article, which, by the way, if high school and college kids are looking for things to do this summer to be productive and to look like rock stars, so that next year, when people ask them, how did you spend this summer, they'll have a great answer. I have a list of 50+ ideas in that article for things that your high school and college kids can be doing this summer. And what else do we have here? Okay, so as probably all of you know, many parents of high school students want to help their child through the college admissions process, yet it's difficult for parents to know how to help, when to step in, and when to step back. Today we have Jill Matos. She's an independent college counselor with Admissions Lady College Counseling here in Atlanta. And she, during this session, is going to provide some helpful tips on when and how to offer guidance and support to your high school student to ensure a successful college admissions process. So let's welcome Jill.
Thanks, Stacy. Appreciate the intro. And I do love that you have 50 awesome ideas for kids to be doing this summer. I think it's important for especially rising seniors to stay engaged with something, even if it's virtually. I know it's a little harder this summer, obviously, but it is an important year for the activity list to not be completely blank for the summer between junior and senior year. So Stacy mentioned, my name is Jill. I'm out of Roswell, Georgia, and I really, really appreciate all of you taking the time to join us today and being a part of this amazing virtual road trip to college. I have never seen, I mean, this is new times for all of us, but this truly is one of the most comprehensive, detailed virtual sessions for the entire month that I've ever seen. So As she mentioned, many parents want to help their kids through the college process. And why? I mean, I think back and when I was going through the process umpteen years ago or more, probably a lot more, my mom handed me the Barron's book. For you guys in the room who remember, it was about this big and full of data. And I never even went on a campus tour. I don't think we had many conversations about college and where we would go in my household, other than when I did start to apply, my mother told me that I had to apply to schools with a large Jewish population, which I thought was super interesting. I was in a very Jewish area, but it never occurred to me that that should be a criteria of the schools I was looking at. And she explained that if I decided to go away, that I would want a community to tap into for holidays or for services, but because I wasn't going to be able to come home. And I do believe my parents mentioned some things about cost, which kept me closer to home. But things have changed, right? I mean, that was 20 plus years ago. It's much more complicated today. And it's much more expensive today, unfortunately. And while it's more complicated and more expensive, in some ways it's become easier to apply to colleges than when I was doing paper. You know, you got to call the school, get a paper application, fill it out, mail it in, hope you didn't lose anything in between. You know, the internet obviously has facilitated the ease of applications, but along with that means that a lot more kids are applying to college, which means the acceptance rates have dropped. So I do believe that parental involvement is key to a smooth and successful and less stressful process for your child, to some extent, the parental involvement. So today we're going to talk about all the different aspects of navigating the not only the admissions process, but a little bit about the application process from the vantage point of where a parent can help, where a parent needs to step back, what role you play. I'm not going to go into each part of this because I know there's a lot of other great webinars that either have already happened or are coming up. And I really urge you to tap into everything going on Road Trip to College, because I think it'll be helpful. And I do mention a lot about college lists, not so much building, but I know there's a webinar coming up about building a college list. So I think that's important for you all to tap into that as well. So I first want to acknowledge, and we all know this, right, that there's a lot of different parenting styles. While some of you may be very hands-on, dare I say helicopter-ish, you know, your kid's current grades, you could tell me how many finals they had a couple weeks ago to wrap up their year if they're finished. You know what homework assignments they might need to finish on, you know, and when the due dates are. And then there's the other extreme. There are parents that really are not engaged at all, and their kids are on autopilot and they couldn't tell me how many AP classes they took, or they're just their kids are self-sufficient. And that's, I'm not judging, it's not good or bad, it's just everybody has a different place where they are with their kids. In the same respect, kids are different too. Some need those constant reminders. Some may not know there's a test on Tuesday if you didn't remind them, and others are on autopilot and they're able to manage their activities and their schoolwork with very little interference. But here's the thing. I think during the college admissions process, all kids need some help, especially right now. We are in the midst of everything COVID related, the influx of changes and information, even as a counselor, coming at me and everybody who works in the industry, as well as kids who are about to apply to college, or even if you're a year out from applying, so those rising juniors, everything is changing at record pace. And it is very overwhelming. You don't want to miss dates. And so I do think a parent helping their child manage, whether it's through the organization of timelines or just keep checking in, I think it's really, really important. With that said, for the families that are very involved in their child's day-to-day, this whole journey of getting ready for your child to apply to college is a journey so that your child can go to college. And there's about maybe 100% chance that you're not going with them. So now is also a good time to let your child take the reins if they're not already managing some things by themselves, because they're going to need to when they get to college. And I kind of see this as the life cycle of how this works. That this is a great transition time period to tell your kids they need to step up, they need to be engaged, they need to do a lot of the legwork for applying to college, so that when they get there, you have confidence that they will keep up with their assignments. Because for first time parents who don't have a kid in college, you don't get to see what their assignments are. You don't get to see the due dates. You don't know, you may never know when they have a test. And you also, unbeknownst to you, for a lot of schools, will never see their grades. So you have to have a lot of confidence that your child can navigate, especially if they're going to a large school. They have to advocate, they have to navigate. And so again, now is a good time to sort of pull back. And I don't mean let them go free and miss deadlines and things like that, but we'll talk about, when you should and when you shouldn't. Also, at the end of the day, being super supportive during this time, knowing that an already stressful process with what's going on in the world is even more stressful for right now. So whether you're sharing in their excitement, you're being their cheerleader, whether you are sharing their disappointment if they don't get into a place that they thought they might get in, I'm here to tell you that life does go on and they will have options, and that you as a parent need to be there to listen to them as much as possible, of course. So what are we going to talk about today? So I kind of took the whole college admissions process and broke it up into chunks so that we could talk about each phase of this from a parent perspective. We're going to talk about timing, like when does all of this start? Just to give you a heads up, it started actually in 9th grade, right? Because that's when the clock started ticking for transcripts and activities. That's the only thing that gets reported on a college application, is from up to the summer pre-9th grade through 12th grade. We're going to talk about creating the college list, but just from a parent's role, not all the nitty gritty about how you really do this, but how you can help them with the research. I'm going to really hit hard about the money conversation. It tends to be one of the conversations parents are least willing to have, but most important to have with their child. College visits, both online and when things open up offline. The application's an essay. I am going to touch on social media a little bit because I think it's important to talk about social media in the admissions process. And it's really just to bring some awareness to you in terms of not adding more stress to the process. So I like to equate the whole college process with planning a vacation. And I know if kids are on right now listening to me, all they hear is, oh yeah, 4 years of college will be a vacation. That's not what I'm saying. What I mean is that when you plan a vacation, the further out you plan, the more opportunities you will have. If you wait too long, you may not be able to book the hotel you want, or maybe the rates for the hotel went up. You may not be able to get a rental property because they're all rented for that time period. If you wait too late to make flights, they may not be available, or maybe again, the fares have gone up. So like most things in life, if you get ahead of this and you plan it out, it will help the success of your child, whether it's success of being admitted, whether it's success of not having a stressful process as it could be, having a fully well thought out application because they knew on the upfront they had 3 or 4 essays to write for a particular school and didn't sit down to do it the date before the deadline. It also, timing and planning has to do a lot with money. So we'll talk a little bit about deadlines and tying deadlines to money. Because again, if you wait and you don't get ahead of it, you may miss a deadline that was tied to an automatic scholarship. So, getting started at about the end of 10th grade, beginning of 11th grade is a good time to really start to put, some things in place in terms of the college process. Starting ACT and SAT prep, which obviously is very chaotic right now with things being canceled or not canceled, but locations aren't opening to administer. But really at the end of 10th grade, you should have at least the conversation about which test you may go forward with. If you need tutoring, when are you going to prep? What are the dates that you're looking at? Because you'll wake up and next thing you know, it'll be the summer before senior year. For rising seniors, if you were affected by all these changes with ACT and SAT, I'm here to tell you, take a breath, take a beat. You're okay. There will be times in the fall, and you will more likely than not get another test time. And I know there's a webinar to talk about it, so I'm not going to go into it, but everybody's in the same boat. Every kid I work with is, they could not take the ACT and they won't be able to take the SAT again until September. So it is what it is, and it will be fine. With all of that said about planning, I think it's very important for parents to really check themselves on how often they're talking about college with their kid. And I'm the first one to say, I have two boys. One just graduated college, one is a sophomore in college, and I really had to check myself because they don't want to hear it every day. It's overwhelming to always be asking, did you study for your ACT? Did you write that essay? Did you contact that admissions director? Did you finish that application? So try to put together a calendar or make a mental check. If it's about to come out your mouth, oh, maybe I just asked him yesterday about this, I need to back off a little. Or make a designated time to talk to your kids about college-related items. This is a long journey. I tell the kids I work with that you will be tired of hearing from me, my text, my face, everything by December your senior year. You will just be tired of me. So, and the same with parents. So maybe every Tuesday night is your college discussion night, and that your child knows and you can talk and ask as many questions for 40 minutes or whatever it is. Again, I was the biggest offender. I really had to catch myself because my own kids got very tired very quickly of me asking questions all the time. So back to the plan, just a little quote, always plan ahead, because it wasn't raining when Noah built his ark. So again, planning, and we'll talk about the pieces that you can be planning, whether you're a 10th grade parent, 11th grade parent, if you're actually a 12th grade parent, and you're actually going into the application cycle, some things you can be doing this summer. But planning is key in this entire process. So creating the college list. Again, there's a great webinar coming up. I urge you guys to listen to it. But how can parents help with this? Well, there's several components of the college list. There's, I do believe that creating a balanced list is partly a family affair. And I do think it's a family affair to some extent because there's academic needs of your child, there's social needs of your child, and then of course there's financial considerations. All of those in my mind, financial, academic, social is what I call fit. And you want to make sure that your student is looking at good fit schools. Because colleges are so expensive, it's really, really important, again, to look at these on all facets. I'll address that in a minute. So kids do need your input on location, on the cost, maybe some other attributes, maybe it is Jewish population, but maybe there are some things that you think, because you know your child so well, that they really need to consider as they're creating their list. So when we talk about location, you have to think about how far does your child want to be. Right now, a lot of the kids are saying, with all these stay-at-home orders, and they've been cooped up in the house for many months, far, far away. And on the other side, there's some kids who may be reevaluating. Maybe they feel because of COVID and some uncertainty, maybe their college list will take a twist and they want to stay within a driving distance. I do think this entire time period has changed some perspectives on both ends, wanting to go far away and maybe staying a little closer. But you have to think, if your child is looking at schools far away, are you okay with the airline tickets? It is not always easy to have to fly, take all the stuff for your dorm, make arrangements to come home on breaks. When you're moving out of a dorm, especially during this pandemic, when kids had to turn on a dime, I'm not exactly sure where my child's stuff is. I'm sure it's somewhere in the city he goes to college, but it was a big learning experience for him to have to pack up and leave. And not bad. I knew he could handle it, and he did. But you have to also imagine, can your student, um, are they okay if they don't have a family member within driving distance? So I have a lot of students who like to include schools on their initial list: California, Washington State, Texas. And once they actually go out and see the schools and maybe see just the whole process of getting to the airport, getting to the next airport, renting a car, getting to the campus, they can better assess, I can do this, or maybe this is not for me because it seems like a lot. It's very important, though, as a parent, that you need to acknowledge the difference between knowing whether or not your student can handle being fairly distant from you during the school year and not putting your feelings, your fears, maybe your separation anxiety in front of that. I have parents who say, we're okay with schools that are 6 hours away. And I always think, well, that's a random number of hours. I mean, what's a driving distance? Is it 4? Is it 6? Is it 8? Or is it 10? And then when I really hone in and talk to them about, is it a cost issue? Is it a flying issue? And when it's not cost related, I usually find it's because the parents don't want their student to go so far away. So again, this is your child's journey, right? This is their experience. And so I ask parents all the time to please try to hold back your own specific feelings unless there's something concrete that says they really can't be away that far. Also on the college list, we have to talk about admissibility as in acceptance rates. And I know this is really, really hard for parents at times to really acknowledge how competitive their student is. And trust me, I know we all have great kids who do great things, but even the best kid with the most competitive transcript, with the 14 AP classes, and they're super hardworking, and they're captain of the track team, and maybe they discovered a planet, may not get into an Ivy and may not get into a very low acceptance rate school like a Vandy or a Duke. Why? Because schools have institutional goals that we don't know about. And if anybody tells you they know what they are, they're not telling you the truth. So it's very hard to predict. So I don't ask you to look into a crystal ball and try to anticipate or guess whether or not your kids will get into these highly, highly selective schools. But what I can tell you is this: if a school has an 8% acceptance rate, and you have 9 schools on the list that have an 8% acceptance rate, all of those schools reject 92%. So that's not really where you want the balanced list to be. You have to have schools that are likely or that are possible. So what role should you play? As a parent, you need to be the voice of reason when looking over the list in terms of acceptance rates. And that's not saying that your kid isn't good enough. It's nothing personal. It's about being smart about this process and making sure that you don't make it heavy loaded with a bunch of schools that are super, super uber selective, where the chances are, less than 90, that 90% aren't getting in. So I do say, again, as a parent and being more mature than a kid, it's a good idea to take a look at acceptance rates and say, okay, you have a good range of classes. I also tell parents a lot that don't be the parent who adds all the selective schools, right? I mean, I have seen parents who say, I think Berkeley and MIT and Stanford and Princeton and Cornell and Dartmouth, and then all of a sudden they're the ones creating the list with all these uber selective schools. And again, it doesn't mean your child can't get in. It means that you don't want your student applying to 15 schools, and you need a balanced list so that some of them are super reaches and some of them are reaches, and they may be accepted, but you can't load it that way because it does bring a lot of disappointment. And I think that when kids don't get into school, it's one of the first times they've ever been told no. And I think it's very hard if you have 8 schools that you've stacked and all of them say no. And I can even say that about UGA, right? Here in my own state with Georgia, we don't always know. There are a lot of surprises. We've all heard the stories. So making sure, again, that you're looking at your students' acceptance rates with schools to see whether or not they have a good balance. Be cognizant that this is your student's journey and not yours. And where they decide to apply and ultimately attend is not a reflection or an extension of you. And it's not an extension of your college experience. So what you think would be great for you may not be the right place for your student. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that, because I do think there's a place where parents do have a voice in looking at some schools or campuses that maybe your student isn't thinking about, maybe because it's a more financially feasible school. So when I talk about looking for this information, whether it's the college list should be comprised of looking at majors and activities and, community and what your child wants. There's a lot of different places that you can help them to look for also acceptance rates. And we'll talk about cost in a minute. But these are some great places. The FISC guide is one of my favorite. You can buy it online. Big Future is part of College Board. It is a free site, but it has great snapshots of information, college data for those who are super into data analysis and don't mind a little bit of time trying to navigate that site. Tremendous data there. College websites, it's a great place to start, and have your student use those college websites to see what a student profile looks like. What were the average ACT scores? What were the average SAT scores? What do they say about the students that they admit? These are places that I recommend you showing your student so that they can do their research. I do believe that students should own the process of researching their schools. And maybe you do a few together so that they sort of get the hang of it. But if a student can't tell you, if your child can't tell you why they want to apply to a particular school, then they really haven't owned the process. So I have a great story about my own son who I didn't drag. He wanted to go, I'll rephrase that. He wanted to go to a certain university along with his friends. So we all, got in the car, drove our 4 hours each way. And when we got back from the college tour, I said to my son, "How did you like it?" And he said he really, really liked it. And he especially liked the business school. And I thought, well, this is the last time I'm ever taking you with your friends, because there was no business school. This school does not have an undergraduate business program. Do you still want to apply? And if you do, how are you going to apply? What major do you think is interesting at this school for you to attend the school if you were to get in? And so he had to go back and do some research for me before I spent the $75 for him to apply. So again, admission offices, they're a great place to start too. If your student has questions about anything college related, they should be calling the admissions office. Hopefully you've been attending some of these seminars where you can see admissions people look just like us in their homes, working from their husband's offices or their couch or their bedroom or wherever they may be. They want your student to call them. They want your student to ask questions. They don't want you to call them or you to ask all the questions, unless we're talking about financial aid, and I'll address that. But that's what they're there for. And they are more than happy to field calls. Your school counselors, they're great resources. So again, great list for you to direct your child to use to start gathering some data. The money conversation. So this is probably the most uncomfortable part for parents within the whole process. Most kids do not know what their family household income is. Most kids don't ask their mom or dad, how much do you make? Or how much did you save? And maybe you have had that conversation, and that's great. But if you haven't had that conversation, it's very important. Kids also don't necessarily understand what it means to take a loan. I hear a lot of kids say, well, yeah, it's the school's $75,000, but I'll just take a loan. I'm like, well, what's 75 times 4? I can't do that in my head, but that's a lot of money. How much do your parents, are they willing to pay for college? And usually the student says, I don't know. And I go back and I say, well, you need to ask. So you need to be upfront with them, and you need to be upfront with them early on. Otherwise, back to this whole notion of the college list. If your student builds a list with schools that are all out of reach for you financially, then you need to have that conversation with your student that you can't have 10 schools that we can't afford and don't give any merit money. The saying is, hope is not a strategy. A lot of times parents will say, well, if they get in, maybe there will be money. Well, if the school hasn't previously given institutional money, meaning merit money, whether it's based on a holistic read of an application or SAT and ACT data, then they're not going to all of a sudden or magically give your student money. I've had people who've sent their kids to a college in hopes that year 2 they will get money, and they don't, and the kids have to come home. So it's a hard discussion, and I understand that. But again, building out a college list that takes into account what you can or cannot afford, whether loans are a possibility or not, those are things to start early on. And probably not a great idea to wait until after all the admission decisions come in, because it may be that the admission decisions come in, you have a wonderful admission season, and when you really get down to it, you've picked all schools that are full pay. And that's not a good idea. So again, I know there was a financial aid seminar, or webinar, but there's something called a net price calculator. Not to get into the nitty gritty of this, every college in the country has some form of a net price calculator, and what that does is it calculates what the college expects you to pay. So the estimated financial contribution, EFC. If you simply Google net price calculator and Wake Forest, net price calculator, University of Maryland, you will find a calculator. And some of them require you to enter your income tax return. So you have to do a little digging in your files to get your information out, just as you were to do it with FAFSA, because it mimics how FAFSA works. But the other thing these calculators do is that if they do get institutional money, sometimes they ask you to input your child's test scores. And then it will just shoot out, you've got $10,000 in possible institutional money, all subject to change next year, by the way, because things are changing. I'm not saying institutional money goes away, but what year to year things change, and schools revamp their merit awards and how they distribute. But take the time, carve out time with your student to sit down and do some net price calculators across the school list. It's time consuming. Once you do one, it's easier to do the rest of them. They tend to all look alike. Some of them, if you Google net price calculator and the school, it may drive you to something on College Board. That's normal, by the way. So again, carve out time, because it makes the discussion a lot easier. So if you sit through the whole college list and every school shows that your estimated financial contribution is $55,000, and it won't be the same for every school, but let's just say it's 55, and that's not your budget, then you probably need to revamp the college list to some extent to those schools that are more affordable. This is the one area I feel like parents really need to be very engaged. So while I strongly advise against calling admissions for an admissions or application question or major question or department question or something related to academics on behalf of a student, because that is a big no-no, I do think parents calling financial aid, or at least starting with admissions, who may transfer you to admission aid, to financial aid, is helpful. I think that terminology, asking specific questions about income related things, is hard for a student to convey back to a parent. So I do think on that end, that is a good place for a parent to be involved. And I do urge you to be involved. So again, you don't get down the list, get admission decisions, and then realize the money just didn't come in. So planning college visits. I very specifically put this after the money conversation. And that's because while I would love for kids to look at, well, we'll talk about how to look at a lot of schools. One of the things you want to watch out for is not going to all the schools that you can't afford. So doing some of the upfront legwork on whether or not it's worth a drive, again, when we're talking about when things open back up, or possibly after admission decisions come in the spring, if campuses aren't open just yet, to do visits. But you need to be looking at admissibility, and you need to be, as in acceptance rates, and you need to be looking at costs before you venture out to do college visits. So again, you don't want to do 4, 5, 6, 7 college visits of all schools that you can't afford. You can do some of them, and I don't advise taking all these schools off your list either. I think sometimes kids really want to apply to a particular school, whether it's a really low acceptance rate or really, really expensive, because they want to know. And I think that's completely fine, as long as, again, there's a balanced list. I do think your child should take the lead on where they want to visit. But when it comes to either arranging flights or renting a car or booking a hotel, I do think they need your help. So again, in terms of researching, your students can take the lead on when are info sessions, when are campus tours, and have them book them online. And you can sit and coordinate it with them so that you've got a good plan. I also think that planning some campus visits for schools that may not be on the first, the top of the list for your student, but something about the school, or maybe it's your alma mater, or maybe it's a school you can afford. I do think going to a school that maybe your child hasn't said, oh yeah, I really want to go, is also a good idea. And I say that because I believe kids look at colleges through different lenses throughout the entire process. So sometimes they don't know what they don't know, right? They're kids. And so they may hear things from their friends or family members or people at school about campus XYZ, and they'll be like, no, I never want to go visit that. And then for whatever reason you may have to say, you know what, I really think you should go visit it. It has a phenomenal neuroscience program, or you didn't know that they had a great journalism program. Let's go look. Sometimes it's just a matter of getting them on a campus. We'll talk about the virtual piece for now too in a minute, because I even think the info sessions can help do that. But I think sometimes kids, again, don't know what they don't know. They need to either see it or hear somebody talking about all the great things that a particular school has to offer. And I think sometimes kids don't look at the school the same way until they actually have been admitted. So meaning maybe there's a school on the list that you really suggest for them to consider. They end up applying, but they have no interest, and for whatever reason. But now that they've been admitted, the lens changes again. Because now in their 18-year-old heads, when they go see the campus or sit on a virtual tour, they know they could potentially be on that campus. So they're looking at it very differently than they did before. I used to say, I understand that it's not possible to attend or go to every school on a list due to cost, due to schedules, all the activities these kids have. But I'm retracting that during COVID, because I do think your kids can get to every school virtually. If it's just signing into a webinar and sitting at home, why not try to do a visit to every school? Along with that, in some cases, showing interest, registering with a school, sitting in an info session is called demonstrated interest. Does it matter? With some schools, yes, absolutely, 1000%. Your child's interest in the school will affect, and I don't mean it's one factor that's going to make them accepted or not accepted, but it's looked at with the entire application holistically. The reason for that is that colleges know, and first of all, colleges all have companies they work with that use big data. big stats, right? Lots of statistics going on. It's a business. Colleges are businesses. So if they know that your son or daughter sat in on a virtual tour, maybe interacted with admissions person, either locally or at the admissions office. Locally, I mean, you have a local Atlanta or local Baltimore rep that they've reached out to, your child has reached out to, and not you. Um, that that will be taken into consideration, that if a child is interacted, then they have a higher chance of attending that school if accepted. You know, the college app process with Common App and Coalition App to some extent makes it much easier to apply to schools, right? You check it off, you fill out the college part, you send it in. So I would say kids are applying to schools they don't look at all the time, but they've tracked data to say, well, if they haven't come to visit or talked to my rep or done anything else to reach out, they're probably not really interested in us. So my suggestion during this summer is make a schedule with your child. How many info sessions can you do? And I don't mean to get Zoom fatigued. We all have Zoom fatigue to some extent, but this whole road trip program is phenomenal. What a great opportunity to use this if they want to go online and find individual schools as well. I think it's important. And just as if you were flying with them to a campus or driving to them to a campus, whether it's down the street or out of state, you would be sitting in on the info session. So sit on these info sessions with your student. I think it's important for you both to hear, or all of you to hear, make it a family affair, on what the school has to offer. You'll learn something. I mean, I always say if you can take one or two big nuggets that you didn't know before after sitting on an hour call, it's a win. Also know that when things open back up and you do campus visits, or maybe even through a virtual visit, if your student, if it didn't meet their expectations, but they've always been excited about the school or the academics or a particular, research or intern program that they have, don't let that one campus visit or that one virtual visit convince your child not to apply. People have bad days, weather has bad days. I think that, if they've been super interested, then you go back and you look again, maybe after the admissions process. And if they've been accepted, then you tap in and you look again to say, okay, maybe it was the weather, maybe it was that tour guide. You don't always luck out on who's providing all the information when you get to a college, nor is it always truly, what is representative of the college. Applications, just gonna hit this on a high note. When it comes to your student filling it out, this is the one most specific place I can tell you to please pull back. Do not fill out your child's application. If there's ever a time to let them take the reins, they need to set up their account with Common App or with the specific school. They need to put their emails in. Ooh, another big point. You need to start telling your kids, especially your rising seniors, they need to check their emails all the time. Colleges do not Snapchat. Yes, they use Twitter, but they're not going to use Twitter to tell your student they're missing something in their application. Maybe it was a score, maybe it was a teacher rec. They have to be checking their emails. I think schools are getting better with texting, but for the most part, email, super important. But your child needs to take ownership of the application process. I have heard one too many times from admission people that they'll be reading an application and something like the birth date is off. Why? Because a parent filled it out and actually put their birth date and it was showing the 60s. So they're like, boy, this is a really old child to be applying to our freshman class. That won't happen if your student is filling out their applications. Can you review the application? Look for spelling errors, punctuation. Maybe your student forgot an award or an honor. That's a great place for you to chime in and say, hey, did you think about this? But do not fill out. I have heard parents say they have filled out their child's application. And I think that that's the first step in, is your kid ready to go to college? Work with your kid to set up a timeline of application requirements. I think this is another place as a parent, as an adult, that you have a broader perspective that everything in terms of filling out and getting ready to apply takes longer than a kid will think, always. So create a timeline. Back to the research. As they're investigating on websites, they should be looking for dates, application dates, deadlines, teacher recommendations. So put it all together. Okay, and then I'm going to hit personal statement, supplemental essays, and then I will be off. College essays is another place that parents should not be involved. I think it's very important for parents to let their kids write an essay. Admissions can tell you in a second whose voice it is. And if it is a parent's voice, they read tens of thousands of essays a year. They know immediately if the student did not write it. Some great websites, College Essay Guide, Essay Hell, College Essay Advisors, and Prompt. They all talk about how to write the essay, what the essay is about. They also have services if your child needs some help on writing the essay. These are great places to tap into. Again, parents really try not, you can read it, you can proof it, you can fix punctuation, but do not write your child's essay. Lastly, I'll end with post or not to post. I think it's really important during the entire admissions process that this is a very personal time, and it's also for your kid to announce where they're going or not going. And I tell my students all the time, have an elevator speech. If somebody asks you, Aunt Jane, Uncle David, your neighbors, where you're applying. My rule of thumb is to tell them lots of different places. I'm excited about all of them. I will be happy to announce to you where I plan to attend in the fall and leave it at that. It is not everybody's business where they're applying, because then the follow-up question is, did you get in? So lastly, be there for support for acceptances, rejections. If they don't get in, I tell them, and you should reinforce this, that, you know what, you can be disappointed and you can be sad, but take your day and we're going to move on, because there's going to be lots of other good news coming. So don't dwell. And I do believe kids follow their parents' instinct on that. So if you stay upbeat, they will stay upbeat. It is not the end of the world if you don't get into your number one school. It'll all be fine. I do promise you that. I have yet to have a kid who didn't land where they needed to land, or found another route to get to where they wanted to go, because it's not always a straight line. So with that, I appreciate your time.
Thank you,
And
Jill.
I think we're going to field questions.
Wow, that is a lot of information.
Yes, it is.
We've got some great questions. Thank you for your presentation. Just first, I want to touch base on June 12th. I actually have an article coming out on the JumpSpark website, or Road Trip to College website, about how to evaluate colleges from far, far away. I've got some really creative ideas that maybe some of you haven't thought of in terms of how to look at schools if you can't get there because of the virus or expense or scheduling. The first question we have is, Jill, how many schools should my student apply to? Is there a minimum, maximum? Can you give us some kind of gauge?
So I do think you should tap into the college list session. I think that will be really helpful. I think the average is probably 8. I have kids who look at 12. I have kids who look at 4. I think 1 is a bad idea. I truly believe that every student should have an in-state, I don't call them safeties, I think it's negative. I call them likelies. There's an in-state college that you're likely to get into and your parents are likely able to afford. So usually 8 to 10 is about average today. And again, I've seen kids go up and down.
Okay, great. Somebody asked, when you shared the list of information of all the list of places to get information about colleges, somebody's asking, how does SCOIR compare to the tools that you listed? Are you familiar with that?
I am. It's called SCORE, and I don't have access to SCORE. It's usually used by schools, by either private schools or some public school systems have it. It's kind of like an Naviance. I don't know, because I don't have access to it and I've never used it, to be honest.
Okay, that's fair. Next question. How do you know what acceptance rate is appropriate for your student as to whether or not they should apply?
Yeah, so my rule of thumb, the first is that you need to be looking at your test scores, right? And yes, I know a lot of schools are going test optional. It's going to make it tricky for this next year or maybe next 3 years, but most schools will publish a mid 50%. So admitted students fall within this range, whether it's 28 to 32 or 22 to 24, whatever it is. If your students' scores are within that range, that's one indicator. If a school is highly selective, meaning it is under 25% acceptance rate, that's a little bit arbitrary because there's no real cutoff for that, but under 25%, you can imagine that they're probably looking for the most selective students, right? High rigor, good grades in their rigor. So, and it's all in comparison to the school you attend. So if your school only has 8 AP classes and your student took 6, they're probably pretty competitive. If your school has 26 AP classes and your student took 2, maybe not nearly as competitive. So I always look at super high reach under 25%. And then from there, anything over 60, 70%, and there are plenty of schools that admit over 60% of their kids, I would say most of those are a little more likely. And then everything in the middle is it's a little wonky and a little possible and a little more unknown.
Okay, great. We have another question. How do I help my child navigate the system if they don't have a major they've decided on? And I'd like to add something. So in
Sure.
your work, do you help students figure out a major? And again, the question is, how do you help them navigate the process or the system if they don't have a major yet?
So one place to look is, so number one, it's okay to be undecided. Let's be clear about that. It's, these kids are 18 years old. There's a lot of pressure to figure out what you want to do in life. I know a lot of adults still trying to figure out what they want to do in life.
True.
True, right? The majors that I feel most strongly that kids need to identify early on, like before they actually start the application process, are business, engineering, nursing, computer science, maybe architecture. Those are what's called, in some schools, direct admit programs. I'm not going into depth about that. If your kids think they're going to fall in one of those categories, they kind of need to know, because they may not be able to apply later. If your student is a liberal arts kid, meaning almost everything else, so history to biology to chemistry to pre-med to pre-law, I think you can do something called UScience, which is a great, it's an inventory of your personal assessments as well as career desires, and it kind of marries organically who you are and what you like. And it kind of gives you some direction of, I'm not really the engineering type. I may be more the art type or architecture. It gives you a good gauge. So that's a good place to start. And I always have kids look at the list of majors at every school and then click on them and see what classes they have to take. Many a time I've had kids say, I want to be a nurse. And then they click on the curriculum. They're like, oh, I had no idea there was so much chemistry involved. Well, yes, there is. So maybe that's not the path you want to go because you hated chemistry through high school. So not a whole lot of pressure that you have to decide unless you're looking at a direct admit program.
Okay, great. And a second follow-up question is, how can a student learn more about the career counseling offered at different schools to help their child know how helpful the school is going to be in helping them find an internship or job?
I would, through websites and calling, maybe even if you can do a campus tour, or even setting up a virtual conversation with somebody in their career center and asking those questions is the best way.
Okay. I want to circle back to, this is my question, demonstrated interest. Can you just rattle off a list of what those might look like, feel like? At this point, is it webinars and virtual tours,
Sure,
or filling
absolutely, 1000%, yes. So if you go on to, let's just use Tulane as an example. It is a well-known high interest school. If you go onto Tulane's website as if you were signing up for a campus tour and it leads you to a virtual tour, there will be a registration list. They are collecting your data. When you register, they will see that Joe Matos has attended the info session. If you make contact with the admissions office, they will collect that data, more likely than not that you've called. If the parent calls, they may collect that data too. Okay. That Johnny's mom has called 6 times asking questions and not Johnny. Just remember that. It could, I don't want to say it could hurt you in the admissions process, right. Just know they could be collecting it. So virtual campus tours, reaching out to admissions, email's a great way to talk to them since some of them are not manning their phone lines right now. But all of that is great.
What about, do you have any idea about reaching out to a student ambassador? Might that be entered as something?
Probably not, but I don't want to say that 100%.
Okay. Getting back to, someone just asked a question. You had the architecture and engineering and some others. What about fine arts majors? Would those have to?
Absolutely. I should have mentioned that. Yes. Musical theater, fine arts. BFAs are a completely different animal for those of you who have kids in that arena. That entire process has to be investigated early on. And usually those kids, especially pursuing musical theater or dance, apply to way more schools than the average student, maybe 15, maybe 20.
Wow.
And it is also audition based for some of the schools. So gathering that information early, understanding what their timelines are, is very, very important. So, and I will also say that one of the other pieces of information your child should be collecting is whether or not schools want to interview. So there aren't very many schools that still interview, but there's a few here in the Southeast that do recommend. And so you can find it on websites. You will come across it like that. And so scheduling an interview is super important.
Okay, we just got another question. If the student reaches out to admissions, what should they talk to them about to demonstrate interest?
I think it's really good for kids to do a little soul searching and come up with some questions that are not easily, it's not information that's right there on the front page of their webpage, like how big are you? Where are you located? Maybe ask a specific question. And this is always a hard question for me because I don't know, there aren't standard questions, but I guess the rule of thumb is look for something that's not so easily findable on a website. And it could be, even if you call and ask, do you guys give merit aid? What does that look like? Do you have scholarships I should be looking at? Can you tell me if I can set up time with the department head? Is it viable that I talk to the chem head? Because I'd like to learn a little more about the internships that kids are getting. It could be anything.
Is it more about making the phone call to demonstrate interest and maybe a little less about the specific questions, but come to the table prepared with something?
Yes, I would say yes, in some regards. But I have a lot of kids who truly have some real questions that they need
Sure.
to ask,
Okay.
So,
My last question, unless I see another one pop up, is how do you help students focus all of their extracurricular activities on a college application?
So that's a good question. And I do think you have an application overview coming up as well, maybe towards the end of the month, or the Road Trip does. So on Common App, and Common App's easier to talk about because more colleges than not use Common App, there are 10 spots for your activities. I tell my kids that you have to prioritize in terms of the most in-depth to the least in-depth. So if you're on student council, but you're just a member and you go once a month to a meeting and you haven't had real impact, but it's your 10th activity and you don't have anything else, maybe towards the bottom. If you are looking at pre-health and you've done volunteerism at the local hospital or shadowed a doctor or did research or took a pre-college class or did something great on Stacy's list of summer ideas, that might want to go on top. The other thing that goes on the top of the list is prioritizing those activities that you've done for the longest. So if you're an athlete and you've played JV varsity, schools know how to easily recognize a varsity athlete and the time commitment needed. But I also ask kids to try to group the things on their application activity list. So if you were a lacrosse player and you volunteer coached and you were a paid lacrosse referee, let's put those in the first 3 so they can see, oh, this kid he doesn't want to be a lacrosse player in life, but he was super passionate about this in high school and really enjoyed the sport, played the sport, gave back to his community, and made money doing the sport. So those 3 things get lumped together.
Okay, great. Jill, I want to thank you for your time. I want to remind people of some upcoming events. Tomorrow at 5 o'clock is the virtual tour for Duke University. On Tuesday at 5 o'clock is another workshop similar to this called Creating a College List. And on Wednesday, the 10th at 5 p.m. is the University of Florida. Jill, thank you so much for your time. And remember, after this webinar, you will be served to a link to the survey. Also, just put in the chat, you can go to roadtriptocollege.org to learn more about all the events, and please sign up. You can share them with friends. And the feedback survey, in addition to popping up right now, will also be sent to your email. So thank you for your time. Everyone have a great Sunday night.
Thank you.
No, that was, oh, did she get off? I was gonna say thank you.